All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the College of Continuing and Professional Studies webinar, Harness Emotional Intelligence in Project Leadership. Thank you so much for joining us today. Next slide, please. My name is Shanta Bulai, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. If you have future questions about this webinar or other programs we offer, the college's contact information will be on the last slide of this presentation. I'm delighted to introduce the topic for today's webinar, Harness Emotional Intelligence in Project Leadership. Emotional intelligence is a critical skill for project managers to effectively navigate team dynamics, foster collaboration, and work through challenging situations in the drive to success. By harnessing our self-awareness and mastering these techniques, we can respond with empathy and adaptability in both immediate challenges and long-term professional growth. In this webinar, we will learn the importance of emotional intelligence in project management and its impact on team success, how we can build our self-awareness by identifying personal emotional triggers and behavioral patterns, and lastly, strategies to manage emotions and maintain composure in high-pressure situations. It's a pleasure to introduce the presenter for today's webinar, Ben Chan. Ben is a project management leadership coach helping overwhelmed, stressed out project managers to become confident, strategic project leaders who are better equipped to overcome their challenges and power in their career. Ben, thank you again for being with us here today, and I will pass it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone, to this wonderful webinar. And hopefully this time that is for you to be able to go and learn. We'll hopefully have a little bit of fun as well. So as we go through this, I want to ask you, have you ever been in this situation where you might be leading a project, the project seems to be moving forward, but there's a big but, right? Maybe the schedule is behind a bit. Maybe the budget is forecasted to be over budget and the customer has started to go and complain about it. And now you're called into a meeting with your executive. How are you feeling? Or perhaps maybe you get an email from another department stakeholder. They're complaining about how you're going about your work. They disagree with what you're doing and it's taking away time from their operational work. We don't want to do it. And they're clearly not happy with how things are going. And they're threatening to not invite you to any of the meetings anymore, right? Or maybe you have a project team member. They're consistently delivering late and it's starting to impact the critical path. It's starting to impact your schedule. And now you got to go and have a one-on-one meeting with them. And that project team member gets really angry at you and they're saying it's not their fault. It's everyone else's fault. It's the dependencies on the task that's causing all the delays. It's not their problem. And for you, what is your emotional response? Does any of this sound familiar? What are you feeling? And what is your first instinct and how you're responding? So as you think about this, you can maybe type in how you're feeling about that in the chat. One is, I guess, have you felt like those type of feelings before or been in those type of situations? If you have, type a yes into the chat, right? Yeah, lots of anxiousness. I know these are things that we're constantly seeing inside of projects. But before we dive too far into it, I want to provide a little bit more in-depth idea of myself and what I do. So I'm a project leadership coach and really, again, helping a lot of project managers be supported where they are. Because sometimes project management, when you're in that role, you can feel like you're alone, that there's no one to go and reach out to and get objective support from. And so that's where I love being able to help other project managers be able to go and succeed, and also helping PMOs assist their PMs so that they can help the bottom line. I also work as a project leadership instructor for the University of Minnesota, specifically on the project leadership topics. I'm a fractional project management consultant, and I've have over 20 years of working experience. And with management consulting, it's very, very closely coupled in with project management. And I'm also a mentor for the Canadian Centre for Advanced Leadership. Along with all of these things, I'm an entrepreneur, a podcaster, and I'm a bit of a comic book nerd. So if you can kind of see those pictures behind me of Wolverine and the X-Men, I'm a huge fan of comic books and also superpowers. So if you see me making allusions to superpowers and seeing how they're going to be brought up, that's where it all comes from. So, today, what I'm hoping for us to be able to cover and understand a little bit more is one, what is emotional intelligence? Why is it important? Why do I care? And what are the key areas that we need to look at or understand with emotional intelligence? And what are the tactics and strategies we can use to exercise better emotional intelligence? And so, hopefully, through all of these areas that we're going to tackle today, we'll hopefully be able to move ourselves towards our journey of understanding ourselves a little better and building our utility belt. Like Batman, have that utility belt available for us to work through those tough decisions. All right, are you ready? Is everyone ready? If you're ready, type in a +1 into the chat and we'll keep going along here. All right. Yes, everyone's fired up. Let's go. So, understanding emotional intelligence. So, the first part is, what is emotional intelligence? Let's start with the boring answer first, straight from the Oxford Dictionary, right? The capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. It makes a lot of sense, right? But if we look at it just its very base level, right? It's looking at how are you going to manage your emotions, your own emotions, understanding the emotions of other people, and what actions are you taking based on this understanding of both yourself and other people's emotions, right? Now, why is it important? Now, emotional intelligence helps us understand our perspectives of situations and hopefully help us respond appropriately, right? Those situations that I brought up before, those are real situations that I've seen many project managers and even myself get caught into. And those are not easy responses. There's a lot of reactivity that you might have, and it can also spiral into worse conversations where you're arguing and you have conflicts on a personal level instead of at a professional level. But hopefully, this can help you understand how you can manage your stress better, how you can enhance your communication and engagement with others, and improve your decision making as well, right? People always say, don't make an emotional decision, make it data driven. But how are you doing that when you are in an emotional situations and hopefully create better work environments for yourself and your team? So, quite simply, we're going to look at how you feel, how you think, and how you act. All right. So the next piece is going to be allowing you to be able to vent a little bit. Hopefully, we can keep it pretty professional in here. But what are the impacts of poor emotional intelligence? What have you seen? Right? So maybe you can type some of what you've seen in your career of poor emotional intelligence from your bosses, from your other project managers, or maybe even you've exercised it before and what you've seen, right? And here's some of the impacts that we can see from poor emotional intelligence, ranging from team morale, performance, silence, right? Wow, I'm seeing a ton on here. Everyone's just laying it out. That's awesome. So we've seen a lot of what happens when we don't have good emotional intelligence being able to be exercised within our workplace, right? So today we're going to walk through some of those more key elements that we can understand a little bit more as to how are we going to identify it, how should we think about it, and how are we going to actually behave appropriately. So when we look at the EQ flow of what emotional intelligence looks like is we think about how we feel, then we think when we act. And how are we going to build it though, right? So this is how our brain is moving towards is like, okay, first I feel something, then I got to think about how about what I'm thinking about related to the emotion, and then what do I need to do around it? So if we want to build it, here's what we can first look at is we can look at our awareness, and then we think how do we control what we're feeling to then lead us to a better expression or action. But that first piece here is starting off with understanding ourselves. And I know the emotional pieces, they can come from all sorts of different areas, but it has to start with ourselves. So let's build a better understanding of ourselves and how react, how our even our brains work to go and drive better emotional intelligence. So why is emotional intelligence difficult? right? When something happens, we sometimes just jump to conclusions and we can go in and react very quickly. Well, why is that? Well, let's examine the brain first, right? Our brainstem, that is the oldest part of our brain. It just keeps us alive. They they regulate our automatic responses. So you think about hunger, not hunger, but things like breathing, blinking, right? You don't think about making your heart beat. Those are things that are automatic functions for to keep you alive. The next piece is the limbic system. So people will sometimes call this the lizard brain. And these are the things that have a lot of emotion driven inside of it. We look at the processes that manage our emotions, our memory, our arousal, things like hunger, right? Very basic, we'll say, animalistic type of things that our our bodies are already wired into. But then there's the neocortex. We can think of this as these are the things that that make us human, that help us think, right? So the brain pieces around cognition, sensation, how we take action, the consciousness piece of it, right? Being able to calculate things. That's our neocortex that is driving that piece of it. And so we can divide it up into those three different areas. The brainstem, well, typically there's not too much we can go and do around it. But where emotional intelligence comes into play is looking at your limbic system and your neocortex and how those different areas are interacting with each other. So, when we look at the limbic system and why it's so difficult, right? It's our old system. It's responsible for survival. And you might see these responses already before from past literature, whatever it might be, right? You have the fight or flight mode, right? We all know those ones. And now we also know freeze, right? Now, here's the one that you may not necessarily have heard of, but the fourth behavior is fawn. How many of you have heard of the fawning behavior before, right? If you have, type in a yes and things like that. Yeah. So fawning is actually related more to people pleasing behavior. If you're trying to go and avoid a conflict, you may not fight, you may not freeze and stop, you may not run from it, but you may just do everything you can to say yes, right? People pleasing behavior to be able to go and appease whatever that conflict is so that it will go away. And you're doing that without necessarily thinking. So if you think about sometimes people that say yes a lot, that people pleasing behavior, that's actually related a little bit more to the fawning behavior inside of the limbic system, right? Now, through all of that, emotions will kick in. And part of that is understanding what emotions are there. So you can go into the link here, you can refer back to it later, is looking at this emotion wheel. Now, at the center of it are what I would call it a very common or core type of emotions that we can go and relate to, right? So you have you have here things like sadness, being afraid, embarrassed, angry, alone, right? They're very simplistic, but as you move to the outer circled areas, it starts to drive a little bit more detail into what specific words am I using to go and describe how I'm feeling. So I'll be honest, anger is probably my core one that I relate to. But then it's like, well, what is it that I'm really feeling inside of anger? Is it because I'm bored, maybe I'm rushed, frustrated, or maybe I'm infuriated about something, right? And it sounds like, oh, well, isn't this just a thesaurus of the emotion? I'm just trying to go and find different words for it. But part of it as well is helping you to go and detect what emotion you're feeling, right? So as we look at at our limbic system and how it's responding, whether it's the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn perspective, is then what is the emotions that you're feeling that are related to those items of how you're responding. And here's the thing too, is that you may respond differently in different situations to it. You may not necessarily say, I'm going to fight all the time, I'm going to flight all the time, or fawn, right? But there may be certain situations where, you know, you may tend to fight more than flight. So these emotions will help you kind of understand, well, what areas is it trying to go into? And the more that we kind of dive into it and understand it, that will actually help us better to go and control it. So that's kind of the first piece of understanding that emotional intelligence area. Now, how are we going to go and build it? How do you improve your emotional intelligence? So we're going to walk through 5 different steps here that we can take a look at, right? The first one is build your awareness. Then you can build your listening skills, practice mindful reaction, exercise regulation, and then deliver powerful action. Now, I want to go make sure that as we understand this, all of this is somewhat relative and subjective, right? I know there's IQ out there to be able to go and assign you a number and say, yeah, you're 80 or you're 120 or you're 150. It's pretty high. But emotional intelligence may not necessarily have that exact number for you right there and then. And so for you, it's the way I like to think about it is how do I continue to go and build emotional intelligence? How do I continue to go and get better? It's not the number that matters, it's the growth that matters. So the first part here we're going to look at is how do you build your self-awareness? So first of all is understanding again our brain and how it works. In our neocortex, our prefrontal cortex, it's used for a lot of different things. And if you look at what we're doing inside of project management, there's so many of these different areas that come into play, right? Decision making, prioritization, planning, idea generation, creativity, right? When we're trying to problem solve, we need to sometimes come up with very creative actions around all of these different areas. So the first part is understand your energy level. All right. So how many of you get hangry? Yeah. If you're at the end of the day, there was whole Snickers commercials built around this, right? You have Joe Pesci suddenly showing up on a cheerleader field or something like that, right? I thought those were so hilarious because that is exactly what is happening. Is that when we don't have enough sugars or glucose feeding our brain, then our neocortex will just say, I'm out. I can't work through this. And so then it defaults into the limbic system. So if you keep sweets and things like that by you, not necessarily saying that you need to go and completely overhaul your diet or anything like that, but if you are finding that you do need that kind of energy to be able to do very intensive type of brain work, make sure you are fueled properly, right? Whether it's just a little bit of the sugars of glucose to get your brain into that area, or maybe it's having a sandwich, maybe it's other proteins, whatever it might be, is know your energy levels because when your brain starts working, it is a power hungry machine. It is using a lot of energy. And so even if you're sitting there and you feel like I'm not doing a whole lot, you know, at my desk because I'm just sitting there, you're probably doing something and it's using a lot of brain power. And that's why when you see that meeting request for your project come in at the end of the day, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can get through it. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make the right decisions on it, right? Some of that might be tied to your energy level. And so, even understanding through your day what your energy levels are like, is it better to have these type of decision making meetings inside of the morning period or maybe before lunch or maybe it's not after lunch? I don't know. Like I get a little bit of a lunch comatose sometimes if it's a larger lunch, right? Those can impact you as well. That suddenly you're in these, we'll say 1:30 meetings and you can see those eyelids fluttering when you're trying to go and present, right? But as you kind of understand your energy levels and how they operate within the day, you can hopefully schedule these very energy intensive meetings from your brain work and have them during those optimal periods. Okay, so if you have time, even today, just an audit. What is your energy level like throughout the day? All right, now we're going to have a little bit of an exercise here where I want to see if we can all understand what our emotions and our behavioral triggers are, right? And there's a reason why I'm going to go through these, and you'll understand that in a little bit. But values, what are your core values that you have in doing your work, right? What are those things that drive you as you do your work? Is it even things like maybe punctuality? being on time. Maybe it's integrity, listening, or trust, whatever it might be, right? Take a little bit of thought right now and you can go and write it down for yourself onto a sheet of paper. And if you want to do a more extensive review of that, you can certainly do that afterwards. Now, what happens when you perhaps run into conflict? What is your initial response? How do you feel, right? Why do you feel that way? Why do you suddenly have that initial response to it? And if it's an agreement or disagreement, do you know why you agree or disagree with viewpoints, right? For me, a lot of it is logical based. If something doesn't make sense, then that's usually where I'll try and piece together some areas and understand, maybe there's an information gap, right? That's usually why I disagree with things. An agreement, sometimes there's a worldview and sometimes there's bias involved with that as well. And when you do get into disagreements, what are those emotions you feel? So remember that emotion wheel we just showed there? Well, maybe you can go back to it and it might not be available right now, but take a look at it later and say, what emotions do you feel when some of these conflicts arise? And the last interesting piece is from a physiological perspective, what do you physically feel, right? Now, then it's looking at, well, are there different situations that you may have different emotions or different disagreements with, right? How does that all work? And part of it is as you better understand yourself, you can then move on to then focus others. But if you don't understand yourself, here's the thing, you're probably going to fly off the handle because you're not focused on understanding yourself first, you're focused on the other person. And usually then that again triggers back into that limbic system. All right. Now, the next part is going to be interesting. When I talked about the physiology, the emotions, and the disagreement that you're having, I really want you to go and focus that because I want to help you build your spidey sense. Okay. Now, when you notice at stressful times and what's going on, and physiologically, I want you to go and really write down how do you physically feel? Do you feel hot in the head? Maybe it's heaviness inside of your chest, or maybe it's your heartbeat, it's pumping. Do you have a tingle in your pinky finger, right? And maybe it's a gut feel, the butterflies in your stomach, or maybe it's something different, right? Write some of that down of when you feel like you are dysregulated, when you're feeling those heavy emotions, but it's happening inside of your body, right? Write those down. And I'll tell you the reason why. When we look at our values that we had before, I'll just flip back to the slide here. When we look at our values and things like that, our spidey sense is actually slightly linked to that. When there are things happening that go against our core values or go against a lot of the pieces that we hold dear, that is probably going to be a very quick trigger point for you. So, for example, if maybe one of your core values is listening, I want to make sure that I'm listened to, and somebody doesn't listen to you and they go off and do something completely opposite. I mean, I got two kids. They probably do, they do that to me all the time, right? But that triggers that emotion of frustration probably a lot quicker than maybe other people who don't have that value of listening as much, right? So if you look at your values, the opposite of that are events that will cause you to be dysregulated. And from a dysregulation perspective, from your physiological side, is saying, can I detect that? So, what is the list of things that you feel when you get into that state? Is it the hair standing on your body? Is it that heaviness inside of your chest? Is it the heat inside of your head? Right? Because interestingly enough, that is your spidey sense. You're not even thinking about it, but your body is already responding. If you're having that shakiness inside of your pinky, right? That's adrenaline pumping into your body. And so your body is already responding to things even without you necessarily thinking about it. And so the way I like to think about it is that you actually have a built-in spidey sense. It's whether or not you are noticing it. All right. If you're all finding that really helpful right now, you can type Spider-Man into the chat. How about that? All right. So the next part is building your listening skills. Yeah, I said someone put Spooderman. That's close too. Building your listening skills, right? So there's three general listening areas that you can kind of focus on. One is content, second is structure, value, and process, and the third one is global, contextual, and form, right? The first one is probably looking at what are they saying? But while you're saying it, you're trying to process what's understand and understand it, but you're also thinking about how you feel and how you want to go and react with it, right? Now, the second level is trying to understand a little, removing your own feelings. That's the key piece here is in the first part, you're already understanding your feelings, but this when you're listening to what other people are saying is let's put my feelings aside for the moment and let's really focus on what they're saying, what is how they're saying it, all the feelings they have around it, right? What is said and what's not said. And this is generally where we want to at least sit in if we want to be exercising our emotional intelligence. The last one is around the global and contextual side. And these are looking at deeper meanings, how it fits into the understanding of the world. Is there something larger going on, right? This is typically what, from a coaching perspective, when you're diving into really deep existential type of things of like, oh, what does it mean for my existence? And how does this fit into my career and all those type of things? It may not necessarily go that deep, but at least the level two side is where you want to go and reach at. Where one is you're not trying to go and think of, how do I respond to this, right? Just focusing on the listener. How do you do that? Well, these are things that we've probably learned at a long time before, right? When we're kids, and even through now, is understanding all the verbal pieces that we need to look at, right? What is being said? What is the perspective of what they're saying? How is it being told? What's the tone? Vocabulary? What words are being chosen to be used, right? What are we using in those things of like you're doing it wrong versus I think we could do better, right? That already then sets a different tone based on that. And also, what are they not saying? What are the things that you're noticing that they're not mentioning? And obviously, there's the other pieces around the nonverbal side, the eye contact, body movement, general mannerisms that they have. And in this digital age, it's actually a lot harder because the camera can mask so much. You can't even see what I'm doing with my hands. I'm actually doing jazz hands, but that's out of frame, right? You can't see that. So body language then suddenly becomes a lot harder to pick up when you're in person and it's understanding whether they're genuine or not. And even with all these video cams that we have right now, so many people don't turn on their cameras. And if they don't, how are they showing up? So those are things that you should try and be able to, at least for yourself, be able to go and build. But as you're having conversations and listening to others, is understanding what are they giving off from the screen. And so, even now you see people, I got broken up with on a text. Someone broke up with me and they just sent a text message, right? Because you're lacking all of these things which you want to have insight into, and it leaves you guessing. And if we look at it from the way we run our projects, there's so much that can be lost if we put things into emails and we're trying to go and listen from that because all of a sudden all the nonverbal pieces are gone. Even tone, right? Those can disappear as well because the tone, you may read it if you like, imagine this, right? You have someone on your project you don't really like that much. And even if they type in a chat, it could be a nice message of just, hey, how's your day going? You may in your head read it in their tone of voice of how you feel about them. Hey, how's your day? Right? So then we have to look at our cognitive biases of are you hearing what you want to hear or are you judging them as you listen? And what are you thinking as you continue to listen? Because as you kind of listen and you're starting to form some of these ideas, it may actually show you're not listening. You're not focusing on what their areas are. So part of this, as we start to go and listen, is focus on the message. What are they saying with the direct words? Understand the context of it, and feel free to go and ask more questions, right? Wait for that full message. And so it can be so easy to feel like you want to interrupt because you have a rebuttal to something they say. I disagree with that, but they haven't finished what they're saying, right? That will already show that you're not listening to their full message. Let them finish and then provide further reaction to them and mirror. Now, this is an interesting thing because I come from the world of management consulting, and so much of it that I've been taught as well has been paraphrasing, right? How do I summarize what they're saying? Is it alike to them, right? But the mirroring and empathy actually go together very well because you want to mirror and use the words that they used to be able to show that you're listening, even though paraphrasing kind of does that. But the difference is, let's say, and this is a little bit outside of the project context, but let's say you're a realtor and someone says, hey, I'm looking for a home. And the realtor says, ah, I found you the right house. It's very different than if the realtor said, ah, I found you the right home, and mirrored the words that they're using. Because they're not looking for just a house, they're looking for a home. And that can have different connotations. So, what happens when you paraphrase is you may be inadvertently changing some of the context that they are relating to, right? And to an extent, it also shows more empathy. And empathy can be difficult because I think one of the myths is empathy means I agree with them. And that's not necessarily the case. Empathy is understanding their perspective, but you can still disagree. All right, everyone following with me so far? Everyone have the put a +1 in the chat if you're feeling like you're following on so far. Awesome. So great to see everyone. All right, the next piece is working to work through mindful reaction. Now, our brains typically we go through reaction and action. But what we want to try and move towards is immediate reaction, have some area for regulation and action. So, again, the first part within the immediate reaction phase is how do we name our emotion? We're going to keep tying onto this. This is emotional intelligence, right? So, can we name that emotion that we're feeling? Because if we can't name it, then we're just going to let it run rampant. So instead, let's go name it to tame it. So we identify our emotion inside of that immediate reaction phase so that we have that capability to say, let's work through reaction and action. So we're kind of in between there. And so some of the factors for you to consider as you look at what your reaction is time. How quickly do you need to react? How quickly do you have time to be able to go and react to things, right? What environment are you in? So where are you reacting? Are you online? Are you in front of an audience of people? Or maybe it's an email, right? All of those things can make a difference. The next piece is looking at the message. So what is the message or behavior that specifically has you so upset, right? Or dysregulated? Maybe it has you angry. Maybe it has you frustrated. Maybe it has you feeling sad or embarrassed, right? What are the exact areas specifically within the message that you're having trouble working through? And then understanding what is the relationship you have with the messenger, right? Because this is going to most likely, these are areas of interpersonal conflict. So, what type of relationship do you have with them, right? All of those things will impact how you react. Like if a very good friend of mine is also on the project team, we've been very, very good. And he says, yo, I think you did something wrong. I do not agree with what you did. Because I have a close relationship with them, my emotional response is probably going to be a lot less volatile, right? But if there's a power dynamic, if your boss comes to you and says, you did this wrong, that can mean a very different thing. If you are in an in-person meeting and bad news is given to you, right? You're getting fired or something like that, right? It's not great, but your time frame to be able to react is also very small. The environment of who you're reacting to, that can make all the difference, right? So think about things of like, how different is it of receiving an email versus being in a meeting? Are you aware of that physical response in negative news? And so the reason why I was having you build up what your spidey sense looks like is that You can take an audit of your body to go and say, ooh, something's going on. I don't know what, but I'm feeling that heat inside of my head. And so something must be going on. That's the trigger for you to start thinking about, what do I need to do to now practice some mindful reaction? And I want to be able to say emotional intelligence is not about ignoring your emotions. Emotions are okay and they can be acknowledged, right? And so you have to be able to see, what are the emotions you're feeling from the other party? Are they angry? Are they feeling frustrated? Right? What are the things that you're doing? And so you have your emotions that you need to be able to go and process. And then it's also understanding, the messages, the relationship, the time, the environment, all of those elements, and perhaps any emotions you feel like are being carried over from them. Because some people might be angry with you, but I may still be, very cool about it. So now we'll talk into things around of exercising our regulation when we are dysregulated, when we're feeling that anger, when we're feeling that frustration. What can we do about it? Well, there's several techniques that we can kind of work through here. Some of them you may have to go and then factor in, how much time do I have to be able to go and do it? So one is box breathing, right? How many of you have heard of box breathing? You can type in box into the chat, right? Part of it is, build up it helps to go and build up CO2 in your system, and it actually helps calm you down. So it mimics what happens with rest and digestion, to be able to go and put your body more at rest and lower your heart rate a little bit. So it's basically as a box. On the top part is saying breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it 4 seconds, breathe out 4 seconds, and then hold it for 4 seconds, right? So that's the box breathing technique. Just think of the four sides, 4 seconds on each edge. The next is looking at that thinking time, right? How are you going to look and be able to see how you're going to respond, right? And how valid are they? How much of it is true and how much of it are the stories that we're telling ourselves? Sometimes when we go through these things, where we go through all of these assumptions, we play out all of these scenarios, and all of a sudden we have this whole drama movie stuck in our head of what's going on. But how much of it is real? So take time to reflect on those initial thoughts and say, what parts are facts, what parts are stories, and how can I go and dissect them? Sometimes maybe all you need is a little bit of action or energy to be able to help you regulate, right? The ability to be able to go and sleep on it, right? Being able to go and step away, taking a walk, right? You may have that luxury when you're answering things like an email. But when you're in an in-person meeting, you may not have that time frame to be able to say, we're going to stop this meeting now. I have to go for a walk, right? So think about perhaps what you can go and do around when you're in those situations where you have to respond more immediately, right? Maybe it's having that breathing piece, or maybe being able to go and understand how you go and have energy beforehand. How do you prepare for it? So if you can, is take a look at and see, what does it look like for you? What does calm and measured look like for you in a challenging situation, right? That provides you a little bit of a goal of like, hey, if someone is giving me troubling news, if somebody is saying something that's upsetting me, how do I look like as a calm and measured person to be able to address this situation appropriately? How would I look, right? What's your posture? What's your facial expression? How is your breathing like, right? Even how you're sitting, where your arms postured around, right? Take a little bit of time to be able to think about, what does that look like? Because that provides you a little bit of a goal of, when I get into these tough situations, here's, at least from the outwards perspective, how I want to show up. And regulation is understanding, what other techniques can you have? Stretching, maybe it's venting, right? But these the regulation exercises here are just a few of them. If you have other ones, keep that in your inventory. Continue to go and build those up, right? Some of them might be just, I just got to squeeze my hands a little bit, right? That helps me go and divert the blood away from wherever it is and I'm feeling a lot of tension, right? What are those things that you can have to help calm yourself? Maybe it's having a fidget toy. I mean, for me, my fidget toy is actually a Rubik's Cube. I like to fiddle around with it a little bit. Yeah. All right. And the last one here is looking at how do you deliver powerful action, right? Think through what your plan looks like and ensure you also take an empathetic view into how that comes across. And not only what you want to do and what your message is, but how do you feel the other party will respond to it? Because so often we're coming at it from a lot from that limbic system of fight or flight, right? Freeze, fawn, all of those areas. Yeah, you might be people pleasing them with the fawn piece, but what are you actually, is that the right action you want to go and take? Do you have capacity to even do it, right? If you're on a project, that might just continue to go and build up so much scope creep of like, well, you said yes to everything. Now our project is going to cost twice as much for all of these things that we don't even know if we should be doing or not. So as we work through some of those things is, obviously there's the critical thinking piece, but when you are actually responding in real time is tone awareness. Be aware of what and how you're saying things. And my favorite piece is ensure you're engaging through questioning because sometimes there might be a misunderstanding. Maybe there's further clarification you need, but it helps you better understand what the perspectives are. What are the stories? What are the facts? And perhaps there's not even a conflict at all. Perhaps there is creative solutions that you can come forward with, right? So by using questions, we can actually help use that to help drive some clarity inside of the responses that we're getting, but we can also promote ownership and problem solving to get through it. So, say for example, that of where a project team member has come in late and just says, "Oh, it's not my fault." Okay, well, maybe part of it is, well, what can you do to be able to ensure that this late piece of work doesn't happen again? And I'm not asking for the other dependencies in all those areas, but I want them to come up with their own solution as to how they would own it and be able to go and deliver it so that they can move into a positive performance area, right? And the last piece is create those actions, right? With accountability. Make sure we know who is going to solve it, what result we're trying to go and reach, what's the vision that we're trying to go and achieve, highlight what some of those common goals are, as well as then who's going to do it, when are they going to do it, right? And being able to work through these tough, difficult situations are the ones that your team will remember the most. So as we go through this, hopefully, we've walked through a little bit of the importance and benefits of emotional intelligence. Why do you need to go and do it? As well as why is it so hard? Right? I know sometimes I will forget my emotional intelligence. I'll leave it onto the third and be like, I'm just so frustrated, right? And now hopefully you understand why, right? Because it is our default setting. It takes more power and energy to power our emotional intelligence. And hopefully we have ideas to help continue to go improve that emotional intelligence. So if you want to, feel free to go and type into the chat here, what's the one step that you can take right now, today, to go and build your emotional intelligence? Is it understanding yourself better? Is it practicing a regulation technique or maybe trying to find out what regulation techniques work for you, right? Go and work through that. Yeah, I'd love to see some of these things inside of the chat. And so I want to thank all of you so much for allowing me to go and present to you about how you can harness your emotional intelligence for project leadership. Because as project leaders, we are stuck in so many different, difficult areas, situations, contexts, people that we have to work through, right? And so I have my LinkedIn here. If you go there, feel free to go and connect with me. Don't just follow. There's three buttons you probably have to drop down, and you can send me an invite. If you have a message to go and send me to say, hey, I met you at the webinar, that'd be great too, because I love understanding the context of things. But I share on project leadership topics. And as well, I also provide that coaching to individual project managers as well as to organizations to really help them build their leadership skills, not only for the challenges of their projects right now, but for the future and helping them build out. So right now, I think, yeah, there's also the Q&A that we'll have open. And here is the QR code for your webinar survey as well. Your responses here will help us build better webinars for your audience, really trying to address your needs, as well as it'll help me be a better presenter as well. I love being able to go and present to you as an audience. So your webinar survey feedback is so crucial. Love for you to be able to go and do that. Shanta, maybe I'll hand it back over to you.
Yes, thanks so much, Ben, and thanks for presenting today. I definitely learned more about myself, which is always a great thing. Ben did add in there our survey link there for a little more in-depth survey. All right, so yeah, we'll go right into the questions now. So our first question here is, um, I'm interested in your words about energy. What advice can you offer for a person whose energy is opposite of the majority of the team? Like you mentioned, morning is good, strong for many, but it's my worst time.
Yeah, I'll say, even from my personal experience, like my wife is not a morning person, whereas I'm up at 5:30, 6 o'clock, just working away. And so, yeah, there can definitely be that mismatch of energy. I think first part of it is understanding one is the easiest part is what are the common areas? Like, is it maybe midday then that you have that overlap, right? So look at it from a Venn diagram perspective of that. And if anything, is then seeing what kind of concessions or discussions can you have to be able to go and reach the best possible outcome, right? So perhaps it's I can't have early mornings, but I can have later in the morning meetings, right? Or maybe I need to have more prep time to go to this meeting. I need you to be able to send me some of the pre-reads and all of that stuff the day before so that when I go into the meeting in the morning, I'll be well prepared for it because I have it the day before, maybe at the end of the day where I'm most alert. I can process it all easily and I can come into the meeting relatively prepared because I have it the day before, right? So look at different solutions that work from your project team perspective that allow you to um, reach the best result, right? To go and say, I'm not the best. One is acknowledging it's great that you're able to at least acknowledge that you do have a different energy system, right? Than others, because some people may not be able to identify that at all. So that is a great identification. And then just seeing what are the different small things that you can do that aren't necessarily focused on just the time, but use even the days. Maybe it's the day before, maybe it's the day after. I don't know, right?
Great, thank you
Uh,
for that. I also share
yeah.
that. I'm definitely not a morning person. I'm like, talk to me after
Mhm.
like 10 and then we'll be good.
Yeah. Yeah. Or
But
if you do
yeah.
talk to me at before 10, here's what I need. Right?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
All right, so our next question is, how does the emotion around imposter syndrome play in handling emotional intelligence and responding to others? I often feel defensive if challenged because I am afraid of being caught as not being right or the expert.
Okay, that's a good one because a lot of PMs probably go through this because of their position. I'm in an interesting area because I'm actually a generalist PM. I work from the perspective of employing a lot of project management foundations, methodologies, frameworks, and all those things, and having a very strong focus on that. But because of my work in so many different industries, so many different types of projects, I'm not a subject matter expert in anything. And so part of it in your head is not necessarily is understanding why is the imposter syndrome playing out the way that it is, right? That you don't feel qualified or you're afraid of being called out. Because sometimes you may say, you know what, it's okay to not know everything, right? I rely on my team of subject matter experts to be able to go and dive into the details and say, here are the technical things that I need to be aware of. I know that's their role, and I'm not the expert on all of those things. But what I am an expert on is helping people to go and get things done, right? So there's a little bit of that, as well as understanding what has helped you been successful in the past, right? So reflecting on your past situations, maybe you weren't right? But so what? Does it really matter that much about being right? But how did you work through some of those solutions? How did you work through to go and reach people to success? What can you draw on from your past experiences where you've been able to overcome that? Right, and keep that in your database of referring back to it and say, wow, this is a time where I felt really just not confident at all. I don't think I should be here, but I somehow still got my team to be able to go and deliver. Well, how did I do that? What did I do specifically to be able to drive that forward? And what can you draw from that experience to then say, how am I going to move forward um, into the future to be able to go and drive things, right? And a lot of this, funny enough, is you have to be able to let go of your ego a little bit. You don't have to be the expert. You don't have to always know that you're right. The whole point is, how do I make sure that the team is moving in the right direction? How do I make sure that the experts are answering the right questions, right? That's your job in facilitating those type of conversations, right? And so sometimes when we think of ourselves as project leaders, we think we have to know everything. And the fact is we don't. Think of, what does our team need to go and do? Hopefully that helps.
Yes, thank you. So our next question, any thoughts on how to develop your own emotional intelligence and mentor others to do so within the context of neurodivergence? To your discussion on nonverbal cues made me think of this.
Mhm. Yeah, no. So when we think about neurodivergence, the pairing, our natural pairing of what we view as nonverbal cues can be off, right? That someone looks like they're not paying attention, but they're really just working through their own way to go and focus it, right? And part of that is, in developing that emotional intelligence, is understanding that person. Have that conversation with them of not being confrontational, but maybe it's in a meeting of, I was presenting on something and I noticed that you're doing this, and I'm not trying to go and judge you at all. I'm trying to just understand, how do I best communicate with you to ensure that you understand what I'm conveying to you, but also vice versa, right? Let me know how I should read you so that I'm not concerned about it, or because I don't want to, you shouldn't be necessarily calling people out in meetings all the time, but I don't want to be concerned inside of meetings that you're not listening or something when you actually are, right? Get to the core of it. And so, as an emotional intelligent person, don't avoid those conversations. Have those difficult conversations, because those are the ones that will actually help propel your team forward and work with them, right? And you don't necessarily need to disclose it to the rest of the team, but you at least should be able to understand from a personal level that you're not misreading or miscommunicating the things that they are conveying in nonverbal cues.
Great, thank you. So we'll go nicely into this one then. So what
Sure.
are some tips to control tone?
Control tone, practice. Practice it. Practice it in the difficult situations, even if it's role playing with someone else, right? Of like, hey, I got a difficult conversation coming up. And maybe it's a trusted third party outside of it, and you want to talk about, hopefully in a way that doesn't disclose anything that's confidential and such, but you just want to go through and practice some of these things, because sometimes you don't know how it feels. As soon as you have all these other, you know, biochemicals pumping through you, when you have adrenaline throwing through you, right? Or cortisone and all these type of areas, you may not notice how your tone is coming off, and you need that authentic feedback. So practice, right? And you're not going to get it right the first time. Give yourself a little bit of grace with that. Be able to go and get that feedback, put your ego on hold for at least for a little bit, and just see how it goes until you can control that a little bit, right? A lot of these seminars and things like that is, we don't there's a lot of information here. And sometimes you think about it and you say, well, I should be able to go and practice it exactly and I'll be perfect. And the fact is, you won't. All of these things take practice in real time in situations that you sometimes will fail and sometimes you'll be successful. And understanding how you can be successful and work through the failures, learn your lessons, that's how you're going to be able to control it. So, with the regulation techniques, everyone has something that might be a little bit different. So, figure out what works best for you and then understand, hey, did that impact my tone at all? Was it good? Was it bad? I don't know, right? That's what you have to figure out.
Awesome, thank you. So our next one is, how do you handle working with clients who perceived experience is different than reality? Example, client says that they have to wait weeks for deliverables, but in reality, deliverables were sent, but the client is the one that does not respond or provide feedback on the deliverables.
Yeah. Um, I don't know. To coin a phase, bring your receipts. Be able to go and bring the facts to it. And some people won't like it, right? But sometimes being able to go and bring those elements up of saying, hey, just so you know, we had sent you an email previously highlighting this on this date. And the thing is, don't respond aggressively to them. They could have just missed it. They could have forgotten. There could have been a ton of emails and they just missed it. And it's honestly just a mistake, but it came off aggressively for them. So when you think about from an empathetic view is they may be upset, but how can you go and frame it so that not necessarily letting them off the hook because part of it as well is you still want to have accountability for it, right? Of maybe the response is, hey, you may have missed this email that said that it was gone and delivered, and that's okay. If you would like to go and follow up on more details after you've had a chance to review the email, let me know, right? And then it's up to them to figure out how they want to respond, right?
Awesome, thank you. So I think we'll do one more question here.
Sure.
So how can you get back to your emotional intelligence? If it seems to be lost, sometimes I seem to be burned out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think part of it is then on your off times, is taking that time to recover and reflect, right? Ask yourself the questions. Why am I behaving this way? How is it impacting others? What could I do to improve? What is one thing I could do to improve? Because sometimes it can feel like a monumental list of, like, well, I got to go and regulate myself. I got to think about my emotions. No, just one step at a time. What is one thing that you can go and do and work from there, right? And see how you can go and build up to it. Because again, we're not all perfect. There's so many things going on that can go and burn us out, and understanding how we're reacting to it. Maybe there's so much stress. There's so many things going on. It can be daunting. So take it step by step. That would be my advice.
Well, great. And with that, I will have you go on to the last slide, a couple slides to wrap up the presentation today. So again, I do apologize if we didn't get your questions. Make sure to send those over to ccapsinfo@umn.edu, and we'll make sure to get those over to Ben. And CCAPS now offers flexible workforce development solutions designed to equip employees with the targeted knowledge and skills your organization needs. Our programs include industry-driven bachelor's and master's programs, along with 15 non-credit certificates and over 90 individual courses. If you or someone in your organization would like to learn more, please schedule a consultation with our business development manager, Beth Laurie. So there is the QR code if you'd like to set something up for that. And then I'll just have you go to the last slide here as well. As I mentioned earlier, we will send a link to the webinar recording within a week of today's webinar. The recording will also be posted to our CCAPS webinar archive as well as our CCAPS YouTube page. And University of Minnesota employees are eligible to receive well-being points for listening to our webinars. So please view the link to the form on the second slide of our webinar from this presentation to submit that. And our college's contact information is also here on this slide if you have any further questions for us. Otherwise, you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.